suspicious of government, and they wanted to make it difficult to enact a law. Remember, they had just fought a war against a king. Well, you don't remember, but you probably heard about it, right? They fought a war against a king, and they established this new system of government, a system of government that was purposefully complex, meaning it's difficult to pass a law. And the idea was to have three separate but co-equal branches of government: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. The legislative, which is going to be the primary focus of these videos, makes and passes the laws. The executive implements and enforces the laws, and the judiciary interprets the laws. But the main one we're going to talk about is the legislative process. And again, it is a process. It's complex on purpose. It was done to make it difficult to pass a law and also to make sure that we get it right. These are important things. They're going to be the laws that govern all kinds of people, you, me, everybody. We want to make sure it's written as well as it can be written. So each of these steps that we're going to go through is an opportunity for more eyes to be on it and get it right. Everything from typos, and yes, I've seen typos all the way through, it happens, to changes to the law, to more people getting to talk about it, which is an important part of it, to new groups of legislators who hadn't seen it before getting a chance to see it. It's also making sure that you and other members of the public get a chance to see it and comment on it, because that's very important. Each of these steps accomplishes that, so that by the end, hopefully the final product is as good as we can make it be. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody loves it. It doesn't even necessarily mean that it accomplishes everybody's political aims. But it's a compromise product, and it's at least as good as we can make it technically, if not always politically. And that's an important point. You've got to get it right. When they're done with their work, it's got to go over to the executive. The executive's got to understand it and know what he or she is supposed to do with it. It's not just the governor, it's all kinds of agencies. They need to be able to read it, understand what they're supposed to do, and do it. And in those instances where they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing, or they're not sure what the law means, or somebody else thinks they're unsure about the law, that's where the judiciary comes in. You have the ability to go in front of a court and say, hey, I don't know what this law means, or I don't think that the agency or the executive is interpreting this right, or sometimes I don't think the legislature had the power to pass this in the first place. And the court looks at all of that and makes a ruling. And that's basically how the three sort of work together and keep a check and a balance on each other. Legislature passes it, the executive implements it, and the judiciary says whether they can do it in the first place and what the limits of that law are. And if there's ambiguity, what do those terms mean? So, your bill has been passed by the Senate and the House both. Maybe it took some doing, maybe you needed a conference committee report, maybe you needed concurrence or dispute, but you got it done. Congratulations. Now the governor has a choice to make. He or she can sign it, or not sign it, or veto it, or partial veto it. Those are basically the options, and there are time periods that apply to all of this that I won't go into.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our Republican media availability here on day 44 of the 60-day legislative session. Just a few introductions. With us today from the House Republican Caucus, we have House Republican Deputy Leader Chris Corey of the 15th District, and Assistant Floor Leader and House Republican Budget Lead Travis Couture from the 35th District. And from the Senate Republican Caucus, we have Senate Republican Caucus Chair Judy Warnick of the 13th District and Deputy Leader Drew McEwen from the 35th District. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Corey for some opening remarks.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to, what do we got, 16 days left of session, week 7, and we're getting down to the wire. Last week was House of Origin cutoff, so no doubt you were noticing a lot of frantic worrying about bills making it out of their respective chambers. And so this week we've kind of turned our attention to what's left and what's coming up. A couple bills that I think we should highlight that are of concern for us over here in the House that we're going to be working to address and fix for the people of Washington. There's an environmental crimes bill that had a public hearing yesterday. As a reminder, this bill would add new penalties and felonies for people who may accidentally, do something on a job or on a work site that could be treated harsher than how we would treat criminals in our criminal justice system who are, potentially harming the public. So, a really bad bill. We think bad policy. There are some other bills that we think are of concern are around law enforcement face masks and the state deciding who gets to be a sheriff, more anti-police, anti-law enforcement bills. We spent a lot of years, and we're still trying to recover from what was some pretty bad anti-police policies in the 2021-2022 session. And so we're worried that this is going to move us back in that wrong direction with our local law enforcement. As you no doubt are probably aware or also paying attention to right now, there's a hearing on an unconstitutional income tax. And so House Republicans are working on ways to hopefully stop that, address that issue. In full swing, we're going to have Representative Couture here in a few minutes, probably discussing that with us, our ranking member on appropriations. But it is crunch time in the short session, so I want to turn it over to my good colleague on the other side of the aisle, State Senator Judy Warnick, for her opening remarks so we can get to your questions. I think you're on mute, Judy.
Sorry about that. I should know by now. But yes, you covered it very well, Rep. Corey. We are on week 7. Yesterday, we had the operating budget hearing, and awful lot of thanks, but no, you didn't get it right testimony. I'm concerned that what we're not doing is looking at the spending that we should be spending on our schools. We've put some extra money in, but when I hear from the people who are advocating for transitional kindergarten, TK, they're not happy. And there's the fact that we raided in our budget by nearly half the rainy day fund. Where are we going to go in the future if we don't have that rainy day fund to help in whatever issues happen? Because we're already out of balance without even including that rainy day fund. So I think the shortfall for the last 2 years, they're trying to cover that up. One party's in control, and one party has the ability to get our budget balanced. And we've also had the transportation budget come out, and we will be hearing on the capital budget today in Ways and Means. So we are getting close to the end, and this is crunch time right now. So I'll be turning this back over to John. So thanks for being here.
All right, let's go to questions. We'll start with Simone Carter.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. Yesterday, a group of income tax supporters, including Senator Victoria Hunt, came out and said that their names were fraudulently signed in con on the income tax bill. Now the House clerk is saying that there's an investigation underway. So I was curious what you all made of claims that a significant number of the bill sign-ins were fakes or duplicates and possibly done by bots. Also, does that change at all how you're viewing the public response to the bill?
So thanks, Simone, for the question. Obviously, we take any questions around that very seriously. So we started doing some digging into it ourselves. Any abuse of the system obviously should be roundly condemned by any of us. What appears to be, a couple that signed up people on it who weren't supposed to be there, that's inappropriate and ridiculous. And we've got to figure out a way to improve our system so that there's some verification or at least some confirmation on those. As far as the duplicates, I'm not going to rush and jump to conclusion that this was malicious or especially not done by bots. There was a fair number of people that we saw that we actually reached out to who thought that they hadn't, that their submission hadn't gone through. And so they did it again. And apart from all that, take all those out. Let's take the numbers out that, Representative Berg mentioned in our hearing today. Still, just over 100,000 people signed in con with unique email addresses that are clearly not bots. And so that's something to be said, right? We've asked for our public to engage with us on these bills, and they are. So we're going to make sure that going forward, the system is even more secure. And it is nice to be talking with Democrats over, security and verification when it comes to important things like signing in to testify and voting.
We did, in the Senate, we did some research too, after we heard these comments. We did random checks on about a little over 5,000 names and found that of that 5,000, there may have been 450 or so duplicates. Some were pro, but some were con. And I agree that with Rep. Corey that whether people are fraudulent signing up, either pro or con, it's wrong on both sides. So we have done some checks and found that occurrence for multiple signatures anyway is less than 9%. So we're taking this very seriously as well.
Do you have a follow-up, Simone?
Yes, thank you. Slightly different subject. I know that Republicans have concerns about the proposed operating budgets, but I was curious whether anything stuck out to y'all that was particularly worrisome, or perhaps items that you support in the transportation and capital budget proposals that Democrats are coming out with.
I think the biggest standout to me is really in the operating budget and the rating of the rainy day fund. Again, we have record revenues in this state, and the majority party, the Democrats, don't seem to be able to get their spending under control. That's the biggest alarming thing to me. That's of concern. The capital budget's a pretty bipartisan budget, and you can always find things maybe to nitpick at, but a lot of it's member driven for specific districts, and that's their rights to each member has the right to advocate for their district. So I'm not going to get too detailed on that. I'm a little disappointed on some things in the transportation budget regarding ferries. But again, when you look at the three budgets, the biggest overriding concern to me is on sustained spending and, frankly, rating our savings account to make up for the deficit that the other side has created.
Yeah, and I think great points, Drew. And I'll just add on to that, on top of the $2 billion additional spending that both budgets essentially do, I mean, they hinge our entire future on an income tax that is legally dubious at best, and including a pension rate of left one, which is also legally dubious. And on top of, rating the rainy day account, I mean, we're rating a pension fund, and we don't know if we can even rate it. No other state has done that. And we're going to use that to try to potentially, at least in the House budget, refill the rainy day account in the outlook biennium in 2029. So the big part, Simone, with the operating budget, as opposed to the other two budgets, is the other two budgets, as Senator McEwen pointed out, are kind of bipartisanly negotiated. You got both parties, both sides in the room. The operating budget, it's just majority party Democrat budget writers in the room. Oftentimes their own members don't even, their rank and file own members don't even know what's going on in those budgets. And part of the big concerns, other than what was noted, is, we're also doing a bunch of budget gimmicks, like raiding one-time raids of dedicated funds to sweep them into the general fund. These are the same budget gimmicks that got us into run-on multi-billion-dollar deficits in the first place. And on top of that, they assume a new income tax, at least $2 billion or more in 27-29, but yet they're cutting from Medicaid, which will total us $1 billion cut to Medicaid in this biennium alone by Democrats here in Olympia. And then at the same time, cutting occupational therapy, physical therapy, all sorts of stuff that will just inevitably cost us more money in the long run. But we have a devastating problem with affordability in our state. One of those categories is childcare. And there's massive cuts to childcare with no reforms to the system. So it will just become more cost prohibitive. for many of the childcare deserts that we have in Washington state. And Senator Warnock pointed out the cuts to our schools. But, the flavor of the cuts was to really protect the adults and harm the children. We have cuts to transitional kindergarten, which also helps out in childcare deserts. So those things are basically a direct attack on rural communities in Washington state. But stuff around bus depreciations and transportation to get kids to and from school, local effort assistance, LEA funds, as they call them, the levy equalization that helps property poor districts. We're basically a reverse Robin Hood now. We're giving more money to the property rich districts and stealing from the property poor districts. And we're basically unraveling, once again, the McCleary decision. And we're hurtling our way towards a second McCleary lawsuit if we continue down this path. But a lot of the online learning stuff that works in rural communities and so many other different things. Running Start was cut. Opportunities for our kids to be able to jumpstart their lives and go to college. These are things that were very harmful, in my opinion, to Republican districts all across Washington state, and even some suburb districts across Washington state, where kids are looking for a way out of a system that has had the lowest academic outcomes in the last 3 decades. So we're going in the wrong direction. At least if they were going to cut, they should have chose different areas, but they chose the most harmful cuts to our kids and our rural schools and our property poor schools. So I think those are some of the biggest concerns we've had so far.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on the capital and transportation, I think the one silver lining in the transportation budget right now is finally, in our opinion, a focus on preservation, roads, and maintenance. We think that that's something that should have been taken priority this entire time, but we're glad that that is a focus going forward, as we've seen with some pretty significant issues on roads across our state. I am a little concerned about, I believe the House sweeps the the Public Works Trust. I think that is hugely damaging to cities and municipalities all across the state. So that's something I'm hoping we can work to get back in, because that is critical funding for our local governments.
All right, next we will go to Sophia Sostrin from the Seattle Times.
Good morning, everybody. I am also curious about the fraudulent con numbers. It's specifically the CAPTCHA verification. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the allegations specifically related to that. Supporters have said that many of the con entries appeared in pretty rapid bursts late at night or during kind of odd hours, and at speeds that they argued would be pretty difficult for a human to replicate manually. And I'm wondering that if those CAPTCHA protections were bypassed by a bot, would you all consider working together to kind of change the sign-in process on the legislative website? Or do you have any thoughts just on the CAPTCHA verification in general?
Well, Sophia, I mean, first and foremost, this is House admin and Senate admin. If there's a problem, they need to fix their system. This is their system that they run. It's not run by either caucusing. And so if there's an issue there, the administration needs to get it taken care of. I will say that, on the Senate side, our caucus pushed out numbers of emails, social media posts, and texts. Those are going to hit people at different times. They're going to there's nothing that prevents multiple people from signing in con at any given time. So, the fact that both caucuses on the Republican side, at least, are actively messaging to our supporters across the state to register their opposition, that when those messages are hitting them, a lot of people are taking that action. So it's not unusual to have a lot of people at the same time. Again, looking at the sampling that we did, let's just argue for a moment that 10% were duplicate or not correct. That's still over 100,000 people, and that statistically would be pretty high to have over 10% be wrong. But that's still over 100,000 unique emails that that registered opposition. Look, the majority party doesn't want to face the music that this is unpopular across our state. And so they're trying to create a narrative that somehow we've manipulated the system. And that, frankly, I resent that accusation.
Yeah, and just to add on to that real quick, sorry, Chris. Great points by Drew. And Sophia, I'd just say that even if you eliminated exactly 50% of the sign-ins, this would still be the most unpopular bill in Washington state history. But I don't think that we're saying half of everyone that signed in is fraudulent. No one is saying that.
Yeah, Sophia, to your first part of your question, yeah, let's fix it. If House and Senate admin needs some money for IT upgrades, well, let's give it to them, right? Let's protect the system. We've been very clear on protecting our state systems, whether it's voting or signing in on a bill. It's funny, the emphasis has been on the con, but in the same numbers, we've seen about 10% of the pro numbers are duplicate. So, it seems to be there's a pattern, which I would guess and I would attribute not to bots, not to, malfeasance of any kind, but probably to people who are signing up maybe more than once to make sure that they're signed up, pro or con, or they think that, that they didn't get it in last time, so they're doing it again. So I try not to attribute motive. It seems to me the pro side is very focused on discrediting the entire number. And I just think that that's, unfair and accurate. And I think it ultimately shows a fear of where their position is related to the rest of the state. So again, we've looked at the numbers. Over 100,000 are unique. Again, to Travis's point, even if you take a vast majority of those out, still the most unpopular bill, the most engaged bill with. And this is what we talk about all the time here. We want people engaged with the legislature. We want to hear from people, and that's exactly what's happening. So we need to listen to them, and we can also work to figure out what happened and strengthen the system going forward without putting down, demeaning, or accusing people of not being real, who are obviously very frustrated with this new income tax proposal.
And I'd also like to point out, Como News had a poll on the income tax issue, and 97% of the people in that believe that at some point it'll be expanded to include everyone. There's genuine concern across the state about this income tax. And again, that's reflected in that Como News poll.
Yeah, and that's very true. And then the signups, I look at the sign-up sheets for bills, doesn't matter whether it's income tax or other bills. And every once in a while, people will sign up duplicate signups, their positions on bills, whether they thought they got it right or they tried it again. Sometimes people get confused, but in this case, I think the majority knew what they were doing, and it was legitimate.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say: if we're concerned about those numbers, let's do this. Let's remove the emergency clause that is entirely unnecessary on this bill. Let's send it to a referendum of the people, and the voters can tell us, and we can use the safe and secure Secretary of State and our state auditor's voting system.
All right, Sophia, did you have a follow-up?
I did not, but Shauna Soursby is actually here with me. Is it okay if she asks her question?
Of course.
Thank you.
This is mostly for the Senate Republicans, but I'm wondering where you stand on the House bill to tap funds from the Left One plan. What is the Republicans' plan for that legislation when it comes to the Senate?
Well, I would say that using pension funds to balance the budget is a poor use of pension funds, and as Representative Couture mentioned, legally dubious at best. So I'm not in favor of that. I don't think that's the right move to make. Again, this is a reflection of zealous spending by the Democrat majority since they took full control in 2017. And the dramatic increases that we've seen in spending across the board that has far outpaced record revenues. And so to say to pensioners, we're going to use money that's in your pension system to balance our desires, I think is a slap in the face to the hardworking folks that are in the Left One system.
I would agree with Senator McEwen. I don't believe any of the senators in our caucus will support that bill.
Did you have a follow-up, Sean?
Yeah, I do. I guess I'm wondering, I mean, is there any version of that that you would support? Because last year, Senator Gildon proposed a similar step in his Save Washington plan by taking 2.5 billion out to put into the general fund. So is that something that you would be more likely to support, or is your concern just mainly around that this is going to the CCA, or a big portion of it's going to the CCA, I should say?
That is a huge concern, and I haven't had a chance to speak with Senator Gildon about his proposal from last year. As a smaller amount might be acceptable, but like Senator McEwen said, it's legally dubious whether we can take money from those hardworking folks. So, is there a method of looking at it in a different way? Maybe, but not at this point.
Well, and I think to clarify, Senator Gildon's proposal last year was involved a merger of the two pension systems there, and then you have a cost savings that's realized. So a little bit of a different scenario than what's being proposed in this budget by the Democrats.
All right, next we will go to Melissa Santos of Axios Seattle.
Hi there. There's a legislation from Senator Elias. It's co-sponsored by Senator King that would let Sound Transit do 75-year bonds instead of 40. I know I know the transportation ranking isn't here, but he co-sponsored the bill. So I'm curious, is that a bill you're familiar with, and are there concerns from your folks about how that would play out and how that might affect taxpayers?
I serve on the Senate Transportation Committee. I voted against it. Sound Transit is behind schedule and over budget, and to try to fix that by going to a 75-year bond scheme, I think is financially irresponsible. With all due respect to the sponsor and co-sponsor on it, that is adding to our state debt load significantly. Even though it is supported in theory by Sound Transit, the state has implied backing on it. And when you look across the board, there are not many municipalities or quasi-government agencies that have 75-year bonds, and it's for a reason. You're paying substantially more interest over the life of that. And if we go back 75 years, that puts us in the early 1950s. What transportation projects were being done then that are relevant today? And I would argue that with any project we're doing today, we don't know what the world's going to look like 75 years from now. And so to bond on a significant project like that and potentially be paying for it long after it may or may not be useful is financially irresponsible, and that's why I voted no.
Did you have a follow-up,
I would be surprised if we had any votes for something so financially irresponsible in our caucus.
Senator McEwen, obviously the concerns from the folks who supported are that Sound Transit won't be able to finish some of the projects it promised voters in 2016 in its package, given its financial overruns right now. Do you have any thoughts about sort of addressing that if this bond plan is irresponsible and not the way to go?
Well, and the other part of this too is that you've got a governing body that is not elected with Sound Transit. That's a big problem as well when you're bonding for projects like this. So you want to fix Sound Transit? Hey, I'm all for it. Let's dig deep on this and let's look at the reasons that it's been behind schedule and over budget. I don't have an easy fix right in front of me, but clearly what they've been doing has not been working, and it's similar to how the majority party has been running with budgets. And if you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, you're falling into that definition of crazy. And that's what we've seen with Sound Transit.
Yeah, I would agree with Senator McEwen. I think that there needs to be wholesale changes in leadership there, including a restructuring of the governing board to make sure that you actually can get people in there that are accountable to the people and not, accountable to political cronyism.
Thank you.
All right, next we will go to Mitchell Rowland of Spokesman Review.
Sorry. Good morning, guys. I was hoping to ask about Senate Bill 6239. It's the one that would require arbitration for claims against either the state or local jurisdictions before they could proceed to a jury trial. It cleared the Senate and had broad support amongst Republicans. It was scheduled for a hearing today in the House Judiciary Committee, but it looks like that got pushed back. I was wondering if you guys had any insight on why that was, or if you anticipate either that bill or similar legislation to proceed in the House this session.
I'm not too familiar with it yet, as it's just come over. Here's what I'll say: if we're going to talk about reforming the way that people can engage and sue the state, I think we should be having a broader conversation around tort reform across the state for all areas. The state shouldn't be setting itself up for a preferred political status and shielding. I think that that would be my only concern.
Yeah, I think to further Rep. Corey's point, and I haven't had a chance to really look at the bill either, but we have this massive self-insurance liability account debt, on the worst over the next 4 years, it could be at least $4 billion. Both of the House and Senate budgets, put large down payments on that. And I think if you stand back 30,000 foot, what you see is a state that has continuously harmed its own citizens and got sued and lost, right? So every dollar of that liability represents real harm done to Washingtonians. And you could pay down the debt, or you could cap liability, or you could do a whole lot of different things. But I think the bigger thing that needs to happen is that we need to focus on real solutions that stop harming citizens of Washington State, especially as it relates to the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, which is the bulk of that tort liability harms that have been done in the juvenile rehabilitation space or in the child welfare space. We're hearing also, Mitchell, that once again for the fourth or fifth straight year in a row, Senator Braun's bill to add a child, fentanyl to the child endangerment statute will not, which by the way, bipartisanly passes through the Senate every time, will not be passed through the Community Safety Committee here in Olympia again. And if that bill dies, then we've run out of every option to try to help kids in our child welfare system. That is unconscionable. Democrats absolutely need to answer for that. That is on their shoulders. These kids are dying at extreme rates right now. The child fatalities and critical incidents are record highs. The harms in our juvenile detention and juvenile rehabilitation system is out of control. Green Hill School, fentanyl distribution, sexual assaults. This is where a lot of this liability is coming from. So if we want to solve the liability, let's not cap people's right to justice necessarily as the first step. Let's start protecting the actual citizens under our care as a state, and start coming up with real solutions that stop harming people.
Bingo.
And Mitchell, sorry. I looked up the vote in the Senate on that tort bill. We need to do something to get at that root cause of what our tort liability balance is. And if you look at the votes, I thought it was going to be a partisan vote, but it wasn't. It was bipartisan for and bipartisan against. So, but it is something that we need to address and take. That's a huge liability to our state at this point.
All right, Mitchell, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
All right. Next, we will go to Bill Lucia from the Washington State Standard.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I actually have a couple, but the first one's related to the budget. On the child care cuts, the Working Connections child care program, some of the reductions there, the bulk of the reductions there are tied to a change in the attendance policy that Democrats are backing. Just what is your position on that particular change? In a nutshell, it would change payments so that they're more closely tied to attendance rather than paying for full months when people are only sending their kids to childcare for some of the days.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'll take the first stab at that. I think both of our caucuses have had deep concerns over attendance in our daycares here and childcare here in Washington State, especially as we continue to see evidence of overpayments to, home-based daycares that at sometimes are making well over $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 in a 5-month period of time. It looks like alleged fraud. Others have alleged it's fraud. And, myself and Representative Penner recently got some amendments into a DCYF request legislation that helps identify and electronically monitor those attendance records. And now we look forward to the Senate hopefully maintaining those and making sure that they pass into law so that we can have some real accountability in that system. But the moves the Democrats made in the budget, one could agree or disagree, but it's not just that move. It's a sum total of a lot of different things. And when I look at the child care cuts, the Working Connections child care cuts that were made, especially in the House budget, they affect really certain counties like Benton County and Walla Walla and Clark County. I mean, these are rural child care desert counties, Columbia, all sorts, right? That this is definitely not going to be helpful. They're not rebasing. And one of the big problems here, Bill, is that we're not reforming the system to be more accessible to families or to be easier for childcare providers. We didn't do any kind of massive regulatory reform that goes along with the cuts. So if you want this enormous state-run, almost regulatory regime, then yeah, you do need to heavily subsidize it because it's not a real small business anymore. It's not a business that's viable on paper. So that's why we heavily subsidize it. So if you have this regulatory regime that is nearly impossible to run, and then you strip away all the subsidies, what you get is less childcare for families that need it the most, especially in areas where it is needed the most in these childcare deserts. And so when you take all of the things, not just one particular policy in a vacuum, it's kind of devastating to the 3 million people plus that our caucuses represent in Washington state. And I feel like the House budget in particular, and the Senate budget's probably not too far away from it, it's just an attack on rural communities once again, whether it be education, childcare, Medicaid, or so many other different things, because they continue to make the budget about special interests here in Olympia. If you're well connected in the I-5 corridor, you're going to get yours in this budget. And that's exactly how their income tax operates as well. At the end of the day, the attendance policies, and maybe we can agree with some of those moves if it were taken alone in a vacuum, but we don't get that opportunity to take bills alone in a vacuum. We have to look at everything in play on the chessboard all at once and how that affects our communities. And the things that they've put together are devastating to our communities. And we're already 7th most unaffordable childcare in the country. This is not going to make that better. These budgets don't do anything to make Washington more affordable. It just makes them less affordable and then puts this reckless, unsustainable, and risky budget and saddles future legislators and taxpayers with things that may or may not happen. It's that kind of fiscal irresponsibility that is leading Democrat budget writers to make the budget a little bit for everybody, but not enough for anybody. We're basically stealing from the things that Washingtonians value and need the most to make sure that special interests get what they need in the budgets here in Olympia. And that's the kind of stuff that needs to stop. And I think that's the kind of things that my constituents and other people across Washington are sick and tired of.
And I'd like to add a little bit to that. Rep. Couture covered it very well, but accountability in the child care system is very, very important. Are we looking at fraud? I don't know. So we need to have some way to be accountable. But Rep. Couture talked about our rural areas. There's rural childcare operations there too. But if we need some type of electronic attendance, if you will, we need to help those providers, those childcare providers, be able to do that economically and cleanly. So I've heard from childcare providers that say this will not work for them, but we do need to have the numbers.
So just to make sure that I guess we characterize your positions accurately, it sounds like without other reforms and with this change in attendance policy embedded in the budget, with the other parts of the budget alongside of it, you're not supportive of the changes, but you could be supportive of the changes if they were taken on their own or paired with other reforms.
I would be, yes.
Yeah, I think that kind of is pretty close, Bill. We don't get the opportunity to take one policy into a vacuum like that. And I think what's most important to us, obviously, we want to make sure that the system is fair, that it's all above board and that it's working correctly. And the dollars are being sent to the people who need the dollars. But at the same time, Democrats have basically destroyed childcare in this state long before this budget, and they're just only making it worse. They did slightly a better job than the governor's budget, I would say, in some respects. And it's not that I wouldn't disagree with some of these policies if you stand them alone. It's that when you combine them with the environment that they live in, it makes it really hard to try to understand what the vision here is with childcare in Washington state. It seems like they just wanted to dink and dunk their way into a fully subsidized government-run childcare system that is totally inaccessible and unaffordable for most Washingtonians unless you're high income. And now the bills are coming due. They can't pay for it. And once we look past 2029, we have $1 billion price tag outside of this budget just looming like a fiscal time bomb with the Fair Start for Kids Act, right? And what are they going to do with that? No one here in Olympia in the majority party has explained what their vision here is and what their goal is. But it just seems like we're going to just overregulate the death out of childcare here in this state, make sure it's inaccessible, make sure that people can't afford it. And then we're going to have this fantasy that we're going to fully be able to pay for and subsidize it with taxpayer dollars. But here we keep rolling that back anyway. So if we want to roll back subsidies and you want to make clever changes, then we also need the regulatory reform to go along with it, because what is unacceptable is our communities not having childcare at all. We got to stop that. It's harming our economy. It's harming our businesses. It's harming our families.
And then a broader question. Representative Corey listed a few bills at the top that Republicans oppose on the House side. Maybe he can list others, and then on the Senate side, just wondering, where do you all expect to see the biggest floor fights as we head into the final stretch of floor action, in terms of Republicans really pulling out all the stops to bog down progress on the floor?
Well, Bill, I can't give away all my secrets. Obviously, a lot of that is going to depend on what the majority decides to bring to the floor or potentially bring to the floor. So I'm not trying to be cagey. It really depends. Is the majority looking to spend the next 16 days we have left on stuff that works for all of Washington, or a subset, or advances some political agenda that may or may not be in the best interest of Washington state? So I think I listed a couple where our members have serious concerns. And I'll end with this. My members are willing to go to the mat on any bill we need to protect the people of the state of Washington.
Hey, I just want to add on to that, there's a lot of bills that are still alive, tax bills that maybe, don't get the same coverage as the income tax that's happening. I mean, we have $1 billion grocery tax bottle bill, $2 cigarette tax, taxes on prescription drugs, taxes on insurers, taxes on first mortgage loans, and taxes on healthcare reserves. And at the same time, we keep taxing healthcare, and then we keep cutting healthcare as well. So it's this dual thing of, first they cut $1 billion this biennium is what they're proposing out of Medicaid, but then also tax our hospitals and tax our healthcare insurers and providers and our system. It's really hard for our healthcare system to survive before all of this stuff. The largest tax increases in state history, and also some of the largest cuts to healthcare in state history. There was some good in the budget, in my opinion, on some premium assistance for Cascade Care, but that's like dropping a a little drop into a bucket for what we've incurred over the last year, and then including this session. And so there's still a lot of other harmful taxes, and it's, again, you can't take just one tax and look at it. You got to look at the sum total, the accumulation of all of the tax increases on the table. And I think Senator Braun put out a menu of tax increases the other day, which is kind of apt because it feels like there's a menu of tax increases, but the only ones truly on the menu are the citizens of Washington and their wallets. We just can't. People in my district, and Drew's district as well, they just don't have anything more left to give. We're done giving. We've given too much, and we're not getting any results as for all of these tax increases and everything else. We're some of the worst in affordability in almost every measurable category. We have a crime problem. We have so many different problems, a catalog of crises. None of them are getting solved by these taxes. These taxes are just taking from people who create wealth and taking from people who work hard, lunch pail in the morning, boots on, hard hat on, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we take from them fees and all sorts of different things, and then we provide almost nothing back in return that's measurable that they want. People are getting really frustrated with that, and all of it is just to cover up for Democrat negligent budgeting and reckless spending and the spending addiction that they have, and we're not getting any results for it, and that's what needs to change.
And I think, when we talk about the floor here over the next 2 weeks, if the income tax passes the House, I don't think it'll be in the form that it was sent over, especially in light of the governor's comments. I mean, this income tax, the other side likes to say that it's to right size our a regressive tax system here. It provides roughly 5% in tax relief and increases spending from that bill of 95%. So if the House is going to pass it, I think they'd be wise to listen to the governor's comments, and that it needs to have more tax relief. And if that happens, it comes back to the Senate, and we're going to fight that thing to the very end. I find it incredible that the largest tax policy change in our state's history is trying to be jammed down the throats of our citizens in a 60-day session, and again. All it does is really allows for an increase in spending and provides very little tax relief. In my 14 years here, I've yet to ever get an email from somebody saying the tax burden from the sales tax they pay on deodorant and shampoo is killing their family budget. I get emails every day about the property tax burden, and my mom and my dad are looking at losing their home. I can't afford to buy my first home. Those are the real crux of things. The property tax burden is huge. And this bill gives very little relief to working folks across our state.
And I'd like to add too to that. We've had our small communities try to do some school bonds. They are failing because people are tired of increased taxes. School bonds, they know what it's for. They know who it's going to affect their own children. But they're afraid of what we at the state are going to do. And I will also like to add, this $80 billion in budget, that's the largest in my 20 years here. And I remember when the operating budget was $33 billion, and we thought that was too much. Now it's $80 billion. Government operations increasing 500 and some percent. And private industry is either losing or stagnant during that time. So we as a government are spending ourselves into oblivion and not helping the local governments either.
Okay, we're in overtime now, but we'll keep going. Maybe we could just limit it to one question here so everybody gets to ask one. Let's go to Jonathan Martin next, Washington Observer.
Yeah, thanks for my colleagues have already asked most of the questions I was going to ask, but going back to the issue of face coverings and the sheriff qualifications bills that I believe Rep. Corey at the top talked about, I was just curious what those go to. A lot of the bills of session have a kind of an ICE overtone or anti-ICE overtone to them. And I'm just curious what you're hearing from your constituents about the status of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement actions? We see national polling, but you guys are in closer touch with your districts.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jonathan. I mean, I've heard from in my district particularly, I've heard both sides of it. People concerned about it, people supporting it. What I have seen is a unique outpouring on the sheriff's bill. I think there's a lot of people that see that as a direct impediment on them being able to elect the sheriff of their choice. So that's probably, I've had probably more of that come through in calls and emails than I have on the broader federal policy. And this is something that when it comes up, I will help where I can, but I also remind people like federal immigration policy is a federal policy, and there is not a ton we can do here in the state on that. So I try to redirect people where they can go. And what I caution people is let's not try to turn state policy into a conversation on national issues where it doesn't belong, because it doesn't help our local law enforcement, as we've seen by some of the stuff they're doing, and it also doesn't actually impact the federal policy as well.
All right. If it's okay, next we'll go to Annika Hauer.
Hi, yeah, I'm with the WMPA. I'm just wondering, with the state's aging population, one study estimated in a workshop in December that the ratio of working age folks to 85-plus-year-olds, especially in rural areas, will go from a 13-to-1 ratio to 6-to-1 in 2040. I'm wondering how any work that the legislature is currently doing or that you guys want to do, just any plans around there to address that and how that strains our long term.
Well, it's actually a national trend, but I mean, Washington is a little bit of an outlier too on our birth rates. We're below the national average, and so this is actually a growing concern across our nation, and the imbalance that we have in our demographics. So a real concern, yes. I can't say that there's been a whole lot of focus currently in the legislature on that issue, but it's certainly one we need to be aware of and be cognizant of.
I would just add to that there is, I don't know if there's any one silver bullet solution, but we have been fighting for our seniors. We put forward many amendments and proposals to make sure, like Plan 1 PERS and TERS Plan 1 retirees get a ongoing COLA. Those people are struggling right now. I think that it's hard to try to take care of everybody when the state is failing to take care of its own pensioners in many ways. We oppose rating left one, but at the same time, we do see that kind of silver wave coming. And what it feels like from my perspective in the House, sitting on Appropriations Committee, is every year it's like we're trying to push back on the cuts to nursing homes, the cuts to adult family homes, the cuts to the things that those senior citizens need. And then we need to do to be able to take care of them. We pushed back on the largest Medicaid cuts in state history, which also helps serve some of our seniors and also long-term care. And so it's been what it really feels like. Annika is just trying to first do no harm and then pushing back against the harmful cuts to our seniors. It feels like that's almost everything that we can do from the minority party right now, is to push back on those things. And of course, we continue to see more harsh cuts on those folks. And we even saw some in the governor's budget as well. So as we go forward, I think our position mostly is to make sure that we fight to make sure that the least amount of harm is done to our seniors. And then we're pushing back to make sure that we're taking care of those folks. Because if it's anything our state government can do, is to make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable in our society: babies, toddlers, senior citizens, people on fixed incomes. I think that's generally what Republicans have been pushing for, especially as it relates to affordability in our state. We got to make sure that these folks can afford their gas, groceries, rent, and insurance. And so we're not doing a good job on that in Washington state. So we keep pushing back on many different areas and categories to try to make life better for those folks. But it feels like it's almost anything we can do just to push back against the harmful actions of the majority party.
All right, next, the last question will go to Sarah Mises-Tan.
Hey, yeah, I was curious if the Republicans had any plans as they consider the millionaires tax on the House side. Are you able to speak to any potential amendments that you're thinking of or any other potential proposed changes? I'm curious if the diaper tax suggestion is going to come back up as an amendment.
I think we're looking at all our options when it comes to the income tax. Obviously, our first priority is to stop it because it's unconstitutional. But barring our oath and our duty there, I think there needs to be significant reforms to it. Senator McEwen mentioned obviously the need for fixing the actual taxes with actual real tax relief. A sales tax holiday here and there is not going to necessarily move the needle enough for people. I think there's a variety of things we need to do. The piece I'll end on that I've talked about before is removing the referendum clause or the emergency clause that prevents a referendum. If this is so broadly popular, what are you afraid of? It barely touches our budget on the 4 years, so it is not as if it needs to go into law today to make sure that we'll survive. So I think the people should have a final say. They've had the say on this at least 10 times in the last 100 years. One more won't hurt. And if the population has shifted that much to where they want an income tax, then the Democrats can celebrate by saying they did what the people wanted. But my guess is they're afraid that the people don't want this, so they're doing everything they can to prevent the people from having their say.
I would just note, along the whole lines of the income tax is that you have over a dozen states right now that have either enacted, are studying, or are in the process of eliminating either the property tax on primary residences or the income tax. And the Pacific Northwest, what does Washington State do? Hold my microbrew and watch this. We're going to increase taxes year after year and wonder why businesses and people are leaving our state. And that's just unfortunate. It just shows you how tone deaf the majority party is.
And I hope you're going to add an amendment to remove the marriage penalty. If you're married, you are going to be penalized under this bill, under this tax bill. The federal government removed that decades ago, and we are leaving the marriage penalty under this bill.
All right, with that, let's go to closing remarks, and we'll start with Representative Corey first.
Yeah, just want to thank everyone for their time. Obviously, we had a robust set of questions today, considering that we're going over 10 o'clock. Like I mentioned in the intro, we've got 16 days left. House Republicans and Senate Republicans, I'll speak for both of us unless they want to wrap up on their own, are committed to fighting to the wire to help Washingtonians up and down the state to ensure that the policies that we implement here don't negatively impact them, and that will include doing whatever it takes to fight for the people of Washington. So I want to thank you for your questions. We think it's important to have robust media coverage here in Washington, in the Washington State Legislature, and we look forward to continuing to work with you guys.
Senator Warnick, did you have anything? Or?
Yeah. I always forget to undo this, but like I said earlier, we're having the largest budget pushed out in my time here. And if we can look at what this budget's doing to not only people in Washington, but the businesses in Washington, the job providers in Washington, what we're doing to them, we need to go back and refigure this. I think Senator Braun isn't here today, but he asked in a recent editorial, do the Democrats in Olympia think Washingtonians are fools? And I am afraid that's what's happening. Washingtonians are not fools. They are aware of what we're doing to them, not for them. So we need to keep that in mind.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll be back again next week.